Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and, well, if you're the inherently curious learner type, the kind of person who really loves unpacking how complex systems fail, you are absolutely in the right place today.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a resident expert today, and I'm really excited about this one because we are looking at a masterclass in observation today.
We really are, and it's coming from a pretty unexpected source. It's a blog post that was just published 2 days ago, so May 15th,
All
2026,
right.
by a writer named Ang. And the post is titled Notes on Gardening, Part 895, The Classic Sign of Intervenal Chlorosis, which I know sounds super technical,
That sounds like a textbook, yeah.
but on the surface, it's just this short, everyday gardening journal entry about a struggling Holy Basil plant, Osmum basilicum for the botany fans out there.
Yeah.
But underneath, it is just this brilliant dissection of a cascading system failure. And our mission today is to kind of, unpack that.
Exactly. And to really get into it, we have to look at the setup Aang gives us because it's crucial. Aang didn't actually plant this specific holy basil.
Right. It was an accident.
Yeah, completely. There was a parent plant nearby, and the wind simply caught some seeds, carried them across the yard, and just, dropped them in a new location. It's natural propagation in action.
Which is amazing, right? Like, the wind acts as this free, invisible gardener. It's a highly efficient distribution mechanism, but, and this is the big but here, the wind doesn't do a soil test before it drops a seed.
No, it definitely doesn't.
It just deposits genetic potential wherever gravity dictates. So just because nature plants something in a specific spot, it doesn't mean the environment is actually perfectly suited for it.
That's a great point. And that mismatch, between the seed's potential and its immediate environment, that creates the central conflict of Aang's whole journal entry because this wind-propagated plant is failing. It's really struggling.
And we transition here from this, like, successful wind propagation to the sudden appearance of a highly specific problem. Which brings us to why visual cues are almost always the first step in diagnosing any system failure.
Right, you have to look at what the organism is showing you. And the symptoms here are really specific. Aang notes that the plant is displaying the hallmark signs of intervenal chlorosis.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that actually look like in the garden?
Yeah, so to define it exactly from Aang's text, it's when the leaf tissue itself turns a pale yellow, but the veins, that complex network of veins running through the leaf, they stay stubbornly green.
It's so weird to look. I always think of it like a stained glass window.
Oh, that's a good way to picture it.
Yeah, like where the heavy lead framing, the veins, the structural grid is perfectly intact, but the colored glass inside that frame is just completely fading out. All the color is draining away.
That is exactly what it looks like. But the really critical diagnostic detail isn't just what is happening, it's where it's happening.
Location matters.
It matters hugely because this isn't happening everywhere on the plant. Aang notes, upon closer inspection, that this yellowing is highly localized. It's occurring almost exclusively at the very tips of the plant, on the brand new top-tier leaves.
Which, okay, that feels entirely backward to me. From a survival standpoint, I mean.
How so?
Well, if a plant is struggling, right, if it's running out of resources, why on earth would it sacrifice its newest top-tier growth first? You'd expect it to just let the old shaded leaves at the bottom die off and protect the fresh growth at the top.
That intuition makes total sense for certain types of shortages, but it actually depends entirely on the chemistry of the specific nutrient that's missing.
Okay.
Because plants are, they're incredibly ruthless resource managers, but they have to play by the rules of physics and biochemistry. So nutrients in a plant are categorized as either mobile or immobile.
Mobile meaning they can move around after they're absorbed?
Exactly. Nitrogen is a great example of a highly mobile nutrient. If a plant is starving for nitrogen, it will actively dismantle the chlorophyll in its older bottom leaves. It packs those nitrogen molecules into its vascular system and ships them straight upward to sustain the new growth.
Oh, wow. So if it needs nitrogen, you actually see the bottom leaves turn yellow first.
Spot on. It effectively cannibalizes its older architecture to build the new floor.
That is wild. Yeah. But so intervenal chlorosis is happening at the top, meaning the nutrient we're talking about here is not mobile.
Right. It's an immobile nutrient. Once it's built into the cellular structure of a leaf, it is permanently locked in. It cannot be dissolved or redistributed. And iron is the classic immobile nutrient.
Okay, iron.
Yeah, it's structurally bound in the enzymes that make chlorophyll. So when the plant pushes out new growth at the top, and the roots suddenly fail to deliver a fresh supply of iron from the soil,
The plant is just stuck.
Totally stuck. It can't borrow iron from the old leaves, so the new leaves just emerge without the ability to turn green.
So the old leaves stay green because they
Yeah.
got their iron allocation before the shortage happened.
Exactly.
Man, that's fascinating. So just by noting the location, top versus bottom Ang bypasses, like a mountain of guesswork and zeroes right in on an iron deficiency.
Yep. The visual footprint points directly to an iron deficiency. But, and this is where the story shifts underground, the word deficiency is actually a bit of a trap here.
Right, because when we hear deficiency, we immediately assume the soil is just empty, like the iron isn't there at all.
Which is the logical assumption here.
And the instinct would be to go buy an iron supplement and just dump it on the plant. But based on Ang's notes, that's not what's happening. Ang points out a massive compounding factor. The soil pH in this specific spot is too high. It's naturally alkaline.
And that high pH completely rewrites the diagnostic reality.
Right, because it means the iron is probably sitting right there in the dirt. It hasn't vanished. It's like, imagine starving to death while locked inside a fully stocked grocery store.
That's a great analogy.
The shelves are packed with food. The food is sitting right there.
Yeah.
But the alkaline soil has essentially changed the locks on the pantry door. The plant is starving in a grocery store because it physically can't process the food around it.
It's one of the most counterintuitive things in biology. We assume a failing organism means an empty environment. We rarely consider that the environment is full, but fundamentally inaccessible.
So how does that invisible lockout actually work? What is the chemistry there?
Well, iron is exquisitely sensitive to pH fluctuations. In an acidic environment, iron dissolves easily in soil moisture. The plant roots can just absorb it seamlessly. But as the pH climbs and the soil becomes alkaline, the chemistry shifts.
It reacts with soy.
Yeah, it oxidizes. It binds with other elements like oxygen and hydroxide ions to form solid precipitates. Basically, it turns into microscopic rust.
Oh, wow. So it goes from a liquid that the roots can drink to a solid mass that they can't penetrate.
Exactly. It becomes utterly insoluble. And a plant root cannot absorb a solid rock. So the iron is physically there, but biochemically locked out.
Well, wait, how did Ang even know the pH was high? The blog post, Ang doesn't mention using pH strips or doing some fancy lab-grade soil tests, right?
No, not at all. Ang deduces the alkalinity entirely through a separate physical observation in the garden after a weather event.
Which is just brilliant backward chaining. So what was the evidence Ang saw?
Pooling water. Ang notes that during heavy downpours, water consistently pools on the surface of the soil in this one specific area.
Which, most of us just see a puddle and think, oh, my shoes are going to get muddy.
Yeah.
It's just a landscape annoyance.
Right. But for Ang, that puddle is the final piece of the puzzle. Because water that refuses to drain into the earth points directly to heavy clay soil.
Okay, so connect those dots for us. How does clay lead to the iron lockout?
It's about the physics and geology of clay. Unlike sand, which has large, rounded particles with plenty of airspace, clay particles are microscopic and flat. They look like sheets of paper stacked tightly on top of each other.
So there's just no room for the water to pass through.
Right. They pack together so densely that they lack macropores, the empty spaces that let water flow down. So the water has nowhere to go but up, forming a puddle. And here's the chemical link. Heavy clay soils, due to their specific mineral makeup, are naturally geologically alkaline.
Wow. Okay, so the heavy rain reveals the clay puddle. The clay guarantees the high pH. The high pH guarantees the iron turns into solid rust. And that insoluble iron starves the new growth, which gives us the interveinal chlorosis.
It's an unbroken chain of causality from a simple puddle to a yellow leaf.
That is just incredible diagnostic work.
Mm-hmm.
But Ang notes something else too. The clay isn't just locking up the iron chemically. It's actively holding the plant back physically, right? Like the roots are suffocating.
Yes, the physical suffocation is just as critical. We tend to think of roots as, passive straws that just suck up water.
Right, just sitting there drinking.
But they're complex, living tissue. To execute active transport, to literally pull nutrients across their cellular membranes, roots have to expend energy.
They need an engine.
Exactly. And that engine runs on root respiration. Roots must consume oxygen to create cellular energy, ATP. Without oxygen, there is no ATP. Without ATP, nutrient uptake just stops entirely.
Which brings us right back to those tightly stacked sheets of clay.
Yep.
Because they're packed so tight, there's no air. And when a heavy downpour hits, whatever microscopic air pockets did exist are completely filled with water.
The soil becomes entirely anoxic. oxygen deprived.
It's the biological equivalent of like trying to take a deep breath while someone drops a heavy soaking wet blanket over you.
That is exactly what it's like.
The pooling water isn't just a sign of clay, it's an active smothering agent. The roots are literally gasping for air, so even if the iron wasn't locked up by the pH, they wouldn't have the energy to absorb it anyway.
It's a profound compounding failure, and it's kind of tragic when you think about it. This seed had the exact same genetic programming as the thriving parent plant. It had the blueprint for vigorous growth, but the wind dropped it into an environment that neutralized every single one of its biological mechanisms.
It's wild. And when you map out a failure this complex, where you have soil physics, chemical insolubility, and biological suffocation all happening at once, you'd expect the fix to be equally complicated.
Right, the instinct is to fight the system.
Yeah. Like, if the pH is too high, dump acid on it. If the iron is locked up, buy chemical iron sprays and coat the leaves.
Which are the standard brute force reactions, but they're just treating symptoms. If you pour acid into heavy clay, the clay's buffering capacity will just neutralize it and the pH goes right back up.
It's a losing battle.
Completely.
Yeah.
And if you spray iron on the leaves, sure, they might green up temporarily, but the root system is still suffocating under that wet blanket. You're fighting an unwinnable war against the geological reality of that patch of dirt.
But Ang doesn't do any of that chemical warfare. The remedy in the journal is strikingly elegant. Notice what Ang didn't do here. Ang didn't dump chemicals. The solution was to simply remove the plant from the clay and put it in a potting mix with better drainage.
It is a total environmental reset. It's brilliant. By moving the plant to well-draining soil, Ang solves the physical, chemical, and biological roadblocks in one single action.
Because it drains well, the water stops pooling. Because the water stops pooling, the oxygen reaches the roots and they can breathe again.
Exactly.
And because it's a balanced potting mix, not heavy alkaline clay, the pH normalizes. And then the iron naturally unlocks and becomes soluble again. The plant literally fixes its own chlorosis just because the environment changed.
Ang doesn't cure the symptoms. Ang fixes the environment and the system heals itself. It's the ultimate exercise in diagnostic discipline.
And that, I think, is the key takeaway for you listening today. Diagnosing a problem, whether it's a yellowing basil plant or, a stalling project at work or even a personal rut you might be in, it often requires looking way past the superficial symptoms.
Yeah, it's so easy to get hypnotized by the most visible crisis. The yellow leaves.
Right. We see the yellow leaves, and we rush to apply a superficial patch. We try to force the system to perform in an environment that is actively resisting it. So you have to ask yourself, when you face a roadblock, are you just staring at the yellow leaves, or are you checking your soil drainage?
Are you demanding that a system thrive in heavy clay?
Exactly. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, building on that whole wind propagation thing from the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Because Ang's plant ended up in that heavy clay simply because the wind just happened to drop the seed there. It wasn't a defective seed, it had immense potential. But the environment actively suppressed its capabilities. It really makes you wonder, how many brilliant ideas or even incredibly capable people are out there right now failing to thrive, not because they lack potential, but simply because the wind dropped them in an environment that fundamentally won't let them breathe.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
Think about the environment around you. Is it unlocking your potential, or is it heavy clay? Something to mull over. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.